Hi, this is Chris Carranza. This is the Gloucester Democratic Dialogue. I'm honored to be here today with John Rosenthal, who is the founder of a few different organizations, but perhaps most importantly today, we're talking about the Stop Handgun Violence initiative that he's been leading for many years now. John, thank you for being here today.
My pleasure.
So we were talking a little bit beforehand, before the cameras got rolling here, around the time span that you've been working on this for how many years?
I started Stop Handgun Violence in 1994.
And here we are in 2019 with all these different incidents and moments later, and you've certainly had your fair share of publicity, but more importantly, engagement, I would say. Depending on whom you speak to, they would perhaps label it differently, but through all of that, you have found a certain way to communicate messages, but rally people together and potentially actually affect meaningful results through some legislation, especially here in Massachusetts. How do you account for the success that you have found over the years, incrementally as it may be?
Well, I'm a business person with influence, access, and resources. I'm a gun owner, so that helps sort of change the polarized discussion of banning guns or unlimited access to guns to how are kids, criminals, dangerously mentally ill accessing guns without banning guns. I'm not interested in banning most guns. And then so we changed the conversation from the polar extremes. Starting in 1994, built the biggest billboard in America on the Massachusetts Turnpike, put 15 beautiful color photographs of kids killed by guns. In 1994, 106 Americans died every single day from firearms, including 15 kids under 19. And we said the cost of handguns keeps going up, 15 kids killed every day on a 300-foot billboard on the Mass Pike. It got a lot of attention, including the New York Times, Washington Post, Boston Globe, and then we filed legislation. The goal was to try and reduce injuries and deaths without banning guns. And since 1994, we've reduced gun deaths in Massachusetts by over 35%. We are an urban state with the lowest gun death rate in the nation now, except for Hawaii. And we abut Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont that don't require background checks. So, I mean, the good news is we have proven the NRA's worst nightmare. Gun laws save lives without banning most guns. But until we have national legislation modeled after our effective gun laws here in Massachusetts, that incidentally, 4 gun laws have been passed since 1998, 3 of which were signed by Republican governors. So this is not strictly a partisan issue. This is a nonpartisan issue. And we've saved lives and countless grief from preventable gun violence. Since 1994, by the way, in America, 850,000 Americans have died from guns, largely preventable gun violence, as a result of unrestricted access to easily concealed handguns that are not regulated. Toy guns are regulated, real guns are not. And military-style assault weapons and large-capacity ammunition magazines, the common denominator in now all, the daily mass shootings of 4 or more people.
Right. And it does seem like there's a certain quality that has almost made it normalized, where we talk about this in a way that the tragedy or perhaps the full scope of all the consequences and all the lives that are intertangled with all of this, of course, with violent death associated with gun violence. And I think that's what is remarkable about what you've been doing over the years, is that you've been, frankly, playing by the rules of the games, as it were, because the NRA is a big lobby, as we all know, and they certainly pour the money into the right talking points to make sure they're distracting us, and I think we're at full peak of that now. But the billboards at Fenway Park has to be the biggest thing that people know you for, at least when coming into this, developing it wise.
Well, that's how it started.
Sure.
I mean, Bill Clinton told me he would change his entourage route when he came to Boston to see the billboard, depending on who was with him. Speaker DeLeo, after Sandy Hook, and before I even sat down in his office, I had not met him before. He invited me in and said, "I'm a father, I'm a grandfather, I can't take it anymore. What can we do to further reduce the risk of mass shootings in our schools and our public places here in Massachusetts, as well as how can we further reduce gun violence,
Right.
and pass legislation. We worked together, but before I even sat down, he just read off the number on our billboard of kids killed since Sandy Hook on that particular day. Yeah, so we changed the conversation when we
Right.
changed policy. I mean, good public policy leads to good public
There you
health
go.
outcomes. Bad public policy, bad public health outcomes. And there's parallels with, you know, something that Gloucester is very well known for now, which is PARI, the Police-Assisted Addiction and Recovery Initiative that I co-founded with a former chief,
Right.
the Gloucester Angel Program. I mean, there's a reason we have an opioid overdose epidemic in America. We're 5% of the world's population. We consume 80% of the prescription opioid painkillers. There's a reason why we have more gun violence in America than the 26 industrialized nations combined.
So you don't believe it's video games?
No. You know, we provide unrestricted access to inherently dangerous weapons. I mean, after every mass shooting, and I could rattle them off over the last 25 years, and the 100 people that will die today, and the 200 more that will be injured today, I mean, there's reasons for it, and it's unrestricted access to guns without detection by law enforcement. And frankly, it's gun violence by design. I mean, if Harvard Business School were to do a case study on how to increase gun deaths, you would take U.S. policy. You would say, no universal background checks for gun sales, period, unless you go to a federally licensed gun dealer, but it's perfectly legal to go to private dealers without a background check if you can't pass one. Then you'd say, law enforcement, you carry 13 to 17 rounds in your service weapons. We're going to give criminals, terrorists, dangerously mentally ill people, 100-round barrel drums without detection. And so, you know, police officers die when they have to reload, just like infantrymen have to, you know, reload, and that's when they're most at risk in war. Now we have weapons of war available to anybody for decades without ID or background check. And we're paying the price with mass shootings. So no other country in the world chooses unrestricted access to guns over public health and safety other than America. And it's on the Republican Senate for not taking up the House bill on universal background checks. It's on the president for trying to deregulate silencers, for siding with the NRA over the majority of Americans that want to ban military-style assault weapons and support, I mean, over 95% of Americans support background checks, but he won't do it because his money, his blood money campaign contributions, like the Republican-controlled Senate, come from the unregulated gun industry. I mean, I mentioned it earlier, but a toy gun cannot be sold in this country unless it has a little red dot on the end of the barrel to tell police it's a toy. The real gun that will result in 100 deaths today and 200 injuries, deregulated. And W. Bush gave immunity to the gun industry, so you can't even sue them for selling weapons and marketing weapons directly to criminals and terrorists.
It seems like, especially part of how you have found the success, and however you want to measure that or say that, I guess you would say it by showcasing all the different events and rallies and certainly the different legislative intersections that you've been working towards, but you know, even how you create talking points and resources through your organization. And you said it earlier, and I think it's very compelling, is that I think too often we can look for what we have not necessarily in common. We look at the polarizing opposites, and in an increasingly partisan world, we're doing that, right? So you talk about being a gun owner, and you talk about being responsible, and I think there's a very big distinguishing factor between responsible gun ownership and being appropriate with learning everything around it versus what you're advocating for all around. And I think it's tough to focus the conversation when emotions are certainly charged on both sides. But besides the tools that of commonality, what do you think are the most effective ways to effectively talk about this to make a meaningful difference, or really just to take a pulse to make sure someone's okay or that these situations don't happen again for the future?
Well, the reason why Massachusetts, urban Massachusetts, has the lowest gun death rate in the nation other than Hawaii, the reason why we are safer living in Massachusetts and less likely to die in a mass shooting or daily gun violence is because we have strong gun laws that simply hold gun owners, gun dealers, gun manufacturers, and law enforcement accountable. I mean, just like automobiles. Automobiles are inherently dangerous products. We require renewable licensing, just like we do with guns. We require safety features for automobiles now, just like we do for guns. We're the first state in the nation to treat guns under the consumer protection regulations. Can't sell guns in this state unless they have minimum safety features. So, you know, if your goal is to impact public policy, then you and reduce injuries and deaths without an inconvenience to law-abiding gun owners, you regulate the product, and you have regulations with regard to ownership and sale. And the only thing that we ban here in Massachusetts are cheap Saturday night specials that have no safety features and fit in the palm of your hand, and military-style assault weapons and large-capacity ammunition magazines. I mean, if every state did it, and the Boston Globe did this whole 4-page editorial on this that I worked on, if every state simply had the same firearm fatality rate per 100,000, which is 3.5 per 100,000 firearm fatality rate here in Massachusetts, 27,000 lives would be saved a year. And what, you know, so we've personalized it, and then we have changed the conversation and change policies without banning most guns. And I would say that, you know, it's just so critical for people to get involved before it's too late. Before, you know, I meet parents of dead children all the time. I mean, you're wearing one of our pins.
Yes, I am. Yep.
We put up 20 little hands on our billboard when Sandy Hook happened. And I was, you know, after Sandy Hook, like most high-profile mass shootings, when all of a sudden people are paying attention, saying, wow, how did this happen? Well, why doesn't it happen when you have unrestricted access to military weapons? I was on MSNBC with General McChrystal, and he was talking about what the AR-15 223 round is designed to do, and this weapon of war is designed not to have bullets penetrate, but have bullets tumble,
shatter within,
so to create maximum soft tissue damage in order to stop an incoming infantry. Well, you know, my friends who lost their kids, in some cases had to identify their children by their clothing. At Sandy Hook, 3 to 11 rounds per 6 and 7-year-old. They were indistinguishable.
It looks
And
like a war
so,
scene.
you know, we banned that weapon here in Massachusetts. But what's also incredible to me, and it's like one of the biggest sort of contradictions in our public policy here in Massachusetts, is we have the lowest gun death rate in the nation, and we make the most guns of any state in the nation. And many of those guns can't even be sold in our state, like the Smith & Wesson made in Springfield AR-15 used at Parkland. So we have a long way to go, but bullets leave gaping holes. I mean, the 223 round, the entry wound is like this, one round. Entry wound is like this, one exit wound is like that. So we need to ban those weapons, not just here in Massachusetts, but across the country. And I think we can start to have an impact on the disease of gun violence in this country.
And I think that's a great way of phrasing it, because that's how where perhaps some progress has been made, is to reframe this perhaps as a disease and work with public health officials. But as you said, there's always seemingly changing tides with regard to political or public support and sentiment and policy. And you said a gaping hole, and one of your billboards, as you know, I unfortunately was back in Saugus, where I grew up, a young boy by the name of Brian Crowell. He was a victim, and he was shot and killed when I was in middle school. It affected my family, certainly, and that billboard had a cutout of Brian with the First Holy Communion there, and the whole image, with that being him being absent, of course. So I guess on the emotional side, though, when you talk about perhaps being enlightened around the policy and how to get involved, what do you do to help emotionally support people? I mean, I think for for me anyways, it was seeing how I could rally behind a family and be supportive, but there's also this feeling of helplessness perhaps, and it seems like there's always some reason that things won't get done, as you're speaking with Trump, and saying certain things but knowing full well that things won't be heard. So I guess what I'm saying is, how do you keep going through all this, because it's tough.
It's really tough. This flag was designed by Manuel Oliver,
Sandy Hook.
dear friend, no, Parkland.
Excuse me, Parkland.
So, Manuel and Patricia were visiting us here in Gloucester on Rocky Neck. They fled Venezuela because of the violence there, moved to Florida and picked the best school system in the state to send their kids, and lost their Joaquin, 17-year-old Joaquin, at the massacre at Parkland with a Massachusetts-made Smith & Wesson AR-15. And we met because Stop Handgun Violence and March for Our Lives organized a march from Worcester to Springfield to Smith & Wesson. And it was a 3-day march. It was 50 miles. It was a great way for kids to get involved. And we had not preschool, but elementary to high school kids, 50 of them, and some adults. And it was really empowering for these kids post-Parkland. And we marched to Springfield. And when we got to Springfield, there was a counter-demonstration of people screaming at us with Trump signs and Nazi signs.
Wow.
Right here in our very own state.
They had Trump signs and Nazi signs as a counter to your peaceful protest.
Yep, yelling at parents of dead children.
Have you seen anything like that before across your tenure of doing this, at least perhaps here?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it shocks people here. I think they think that's somewhere else of sorts. But.
Yeah, you'd be surprised. I mean, it used to be when I was quoted in the Boston Globe, I'd get, anti-Semitic hate mail, death threats, all kinds of stuff. I still get that every once in a while, but people don't act. And sort of directly to your question, the only thing worse than the gun violence and the daily mass shootings and the daily deaths is not doing anything about it.
Right.
So at some point, there'll be a tipping point. But think about it, 20 babies at Sandy Hook, 34 at Parkland, 36 at Columbine, 20 years ago, 32 at Virginia Tech. But even I, cynical me, 850,000 dead people later since I started Stop Handgun Violence and built that billboard, even I thought when enough people died, there might, members of Congress might find their backbone. But Las Vegas, 58 dead, 558 wounded, 851 sent to the hospital, and Congress did nothing. And Massachusetts was the only state that banned the bump stock, which turns a semi-automatic into an automatic. And we have this horrific disease that we have created. This is manufactured crisis, and don't be fooled.
Right.
This is about selling guns and creating a cultural war that we now have a president that is throwing fuel on in order to get reelected. We need to take back our democracy. It's all about 2021. It's all about beating the Republicans in the Senate. It's all about holding the House and throwing this criminal and his criminal enterprise out of the White House. But until we do this, you can't be surprised when national gun policy is to create more gun violence, fear, and gun sales for a uniquely unregulated industry. It's unconscionable. It's a uniquely American problem, and it's as a result of people not participating in their democracy and allowing special interests to control our politics and now our health.
So you mentioned the presidential race coming up. There's a lot of talk about the different candidates. We have two locally, Congressman Moulton and Senator Warren, but there's a very big field here. Has any of the candidates tried to work with you to develop additional ways to work on this? Is there anyone you're compelled by on the national side?
Well, I've known Elizabeth for years.
Sure.
She's been a huge supporter. Before she won the Senate, since she's been in the Senate, and her policies around gun violence, if she's president, I think are excellent. I think Biden's will be as well. Seth's will be as well. I mean, it's really, for me, anybody but the criminal Trump. But I would say that some are better than others, certainly, and I'm going to give more and do more and be more active in this election than I ever have been. You know, as Joe Biden said, you know, if we can get over one term of this criminal, 2 terms would be catastrophic.
Do you think that do you think there's enough conversation with regard to the debates locally or nationally on this topic, or is it just that they are finally catching up with it because it's been another, of course, incident and therefore it's being talked about?
Well, I mean, it's been 25 years
Right.
for me.
Yeah.
And I've seen the Democrats go from courageous on guns to cowards on guns. Parkland was a tipping point.
Yeah.
And then the March for Our Live kids, many of
Right.
whom I've come to know,
Right.
they couldn't even vote in the midterms, but they did a get out the vote effort unlike anything I've seen.
I was going to say that they really seem to. It's funny. I was looking at there's a great website, the stophandgunviolence.org, where you can see a toolkit and you can see different resources about how to talk about this. Additionally, there's information with regard to the latest data, which is, of course, disturbing and appalling to see how this is being compiled year over year. This year is turning to be a much higher year as compared to others, but it doesn't really stop. More importantly, they found a way, these kids, to not just make it about being another moment that was going to pass by. They really found a way to make it actionable. And I think for the first time in a long time, it seemed like Americans were hopeful that these young minds could really affect something positive. And you know, again, there's a tipping point between publicity versus public policy and changing minds, and the CNN town hall forums and people's thoughts about getting kids involved. But even here locally in Gloucester High School, we had people walking out and the controversy around that. Do you think that for the next generation that they're in a world where they have to fight like this?
Yeah,
that's right.
Because our generation has failed miserably. We've created an environment around our own selfish consumerism and who knows what else. So our kids don't feel safe in schools because we allowed this to happen. And our kids don't feel safe, and none of us are safe in public places as a result of us, our generation, allowing unrestricted access to guns and not holding our elected officials accountable. And there's a long history in this country of student movements changing public policy.
That's right.
And so we need that desperately now. So I would say to anybody who's interested, go to stophandgunviolence.org, volunteer, come to the Democratic Party, volunteer, get out the vote, and more, you know, as important as anything is get involved in races outside of Massachusetts, because we're going to vote the right way.
Right.
But you know, the swing states are going to make it, you know, the difference again. And fight for your democracy. Don't take it for granted. It doesn't have to be this way. This is a choice that our spineless members of Congress, primarily in the Republican Party now, have chosen. Blood money campaign to contributions over public health and safety. That cannot be allowed to stand. And how many more, you know, massacres are there going to be? And I hesitate to say, but there will be massacres far greater than anything we have seen yet, especially now that the white supremacy movement has been given so much leeway and support by a racist, misogynist, criminal president, you know, who's acting similarly to Hitler. I mean, separating families.
Yeah, the rhetoric is incredible.
No, but it's not just rhetoric.
Right. No, you're right.
It's action.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
I mean, we
It's
are
resulting in
acting
that. Yeah,
as,
you're right.
you know, like a dictatorship, and it's in our name, and we've got to get our country back.
Yep. So I know we're wrapping up shortly here. As I understand it, obviously you can go to the website there, but do you have any upcoming events or rallies that people should be aware of?
Yeah, we're celebrating our 25th anniversary at the
Congratulations.
House of Blues on October 24th. We are going to be engaging with businesses around a gun safety certified mark, like the Good Housekeeping seal
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
or recycling symbol.
Yep.
We designed that. Manuel and I designed that. Hopefully we're going to get a lot of companies signing on, like you've seen Dick's and Tom's
Yeah.
and Levi's, and hopefully, you know, we're going to be able to get national businesses to help in the absence of national elected officials doing the right thing.
Yep.
And we're going to be fighting hard to get the vote out and be as strong and passionate a single issue voter on gun violence
Right.
prevention as the small but loud gun lobby.
Right.
And they're in shambles right now. So there's a moment, and this is a moment. And don't ever forget that, like our billboard with Brian, bullets leave holes in people and minds and communities and families, and it doesn't have to be, but we have to hold our electeds accountable and enact comprehensive, proven,
Right.
evidence-based
Right.
gun violence prevention laws, like Massachusetts has proven to make our state the safest state in the nation. If you look at every single state with tougher gun laws and background checks, have a lower gun death rate than every single state with lax gun laws. And after every mass shooting, you hear the same thing.
Yep.
It's mental illness.
Right.
No.
Right.
No. Every country has mentally ill people.
Right.
We arm them with military-style assault weapons, unlike any other country.
Right.
And then you hear gun laws don't work. Well, every state with lax gun laws has more gun violence than every state with tougher gun laws. And then you hear that the Second Amendment doesn't allow for gun regulations. Well, Scalia said you can't ban guns in the common use of the time of the founders, but you can put reasonable restrictions on how guns are sold. And all that's protected are black powder single-shot muskets that were at the time of the founders, and he specifically said assault weapons aren't protected. So you can do exactly what we've done here in Massachusetts nationally without any, you know, running afoul of the Second Amendment.
Well, and I think that's why it's so important to do exactly just that. I know I have certainly found some solace in trying to get more involved, but to do it on the community side. And there's never not a way to learn how to use the best narratives around the latest talking points. I mean, we didn't get to 3D printing guns, and there's more topics, but that's why it's so important to get involved, to be a part of the solution, to understand the nuance, but to make that change. So thank you again for joining us here today. I would ask everyone to please head to the website, stophandgunviolence.org, if you can head off to that fundraiser, but more importantly, to please get involved. And thank you, John, for coming here today and to help talk about this
Thanks for having me.
very important subject. And thank you for all your hard work, too.
Thank you.
Thank you.